All right, y'all. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Lisa, this is the last episode of this 2024 Black History Month. And so,
Yes, it is.
not that we're going to stop talking about race, but we
Right.
have some continuation of some of the previous episodes. But how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Bright and sunny here in Denver, Colorado, so I'm loving that. No snow in the forecast. Woohoo! So happy, to be free of that for a while.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Our temperatures have been dipping down into the 20s at night, so I'm grateful that it's sunnier, ER. So it's not as cold, but let's just dive into phase one because, Lisa, this is a continuation of our previous episode where we were talking about my oldest son's Black History Month assignment, which happened to be on Jackie Robinson. And maybe I messed with the algorithms or something, Lisa, when we were doing research on Jackie Robinson, because the next thing that popped up the following week was that the Jackie Robinson statue was stolen. I mean, I'm talking about cut off at the ankle stolen. Um, and it's like heartbreaking, right? Because this is a bronze statue. It was commissioned for a little league called League 42 that is named after Jackie Robinson using his number. Um, and it's just cut off at the ankles and found in trash can in a different part of their park. I guess this person assumed that they were going to melt this down and sell it. So I'm like, okay, Ricky Alderete, what were you thinking, man? What were you thinking that made you think it was wise to cut off an iconic statue at the ankles to then be melted down and sold when I don't even think you can melt it because the temperature is so high? Like, there was no thought in this, Lisa. None whatsoever. So,
No,
breaking news.
no.
Once again, we have a statue of a Black person that has been completely obliterated.
Yeah, and I think we are probably giving him too much credit in thinking about some of the points you just made. Yeah, we looked up the melting temperature of bronze, and for those who are interested in random facts for your next pub quiz, it is 1742 degrees Fahrenheit or 960 degrees Celsius. So putting it in a trash can and setting it on fire is unlikely to achieve that temperature. But even if that's not what he wanted to do, um, you know, I think that the larger impact of his actions, right, is what gets missed because some of the reporting around it is related to whether or not it was a hate crime, right? Whether or not it was bias motivated. And to some degree, it's not that that doesn't matter, but I think what gets missed, and this is a point that you have made offline, Shaunna, is that there is a pretty big ripple impact to defacing, destroying, removing a statue of such an important person within the African American community. And given the history of his role there in Kansas City, um, I think that this guy wasn't even giving it 1 ounce of consideration, right? He's just thinking, oh, I could perhaps sell this for parts or melt it down, which, we've already established that wasn't very smart. But I don't know what you're thinking in terms of that greater impact, right? Of the symbolism there.
Yeah, I don't think there was any thought. I mean, the thoughts we just had in the first few moments of this podcast is more than I think this gentleman ever exhausted. Okay, let me be clear on that. But I still feel strongly that oftentimes we do put so much emphasis on intent in the legal system that the impact does get watered down a little bit, right? So if there was no real knowledge or depth of understanding of the significance of Jackie Robinson, does that take away the impact of this team of Black people in this country, of baseball players, athletes, other Black people who understand the significance of Jackie's life? No, it doesn't take away that sting. I don't care if you were trying to melt it down and sell it or whether you hated the man and everything he stood for and did it. It's still the harm that's there. And based on what I've read in the reports, this is not something that can be repaired based on how it was cut. So therefore, it has to be recast in its entirety. So this is a what, $200,000 statue that now has to be repaired, and people are, raising money, and fortunately they've raised quite a bit of money, but that would be unnecessary. Like, Lisa, I'm always thinking about where money is best spent. I'm thinking to myself, if you raise 200 grand for a statue that should have never been touched, that 200,000 could go towards
Right.
the actual little league itself, and
Yeah.
uniforms
Yeah.
and equipment and travel if they need to go play games, all those different things. And so, to me, it's a bit crushing that sometimes we do make the intent more important than the impact. And, for those of you all who may be listening to this particular episode, do a little bit of digging and homework on Jackie Robinson himself. I was pretty decently well versed on Jackie Robinson, but as I shared with you all in the last episode, I was working with Trey on his assignment for school, and we actually went into more depth, not on Jackie himself, but actually on his wife and how significant she was as a spouse to set up the Jackie Robinson Foundation and a lot of the impact that's happening through philanthropic efforts through his family. And she was a nurse and a professor in her own right. Like, there's a lot of deep roots that are connected to this work, and it's not just baseball, and it's not really about the athleticism per se. It is about the symbols and how important symbols are in the world. And so, I think we're kind of missing the point if we're just thinking about what was the intent. Why would someone do that? I'm
Yeah.
almost at the point of not caring. Really.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's thoughtless, right? Not that there would have been a quote unquote better statue for this person to cut down and try and melt, but it's I think in situated in the context of Jackie Robinson's role in US history, and then situated in the kind of larger narrative around enslavement and segregation and Jim Crow, this where white society, white culture, white people have been like metaphorically cutting down African American people and Black people for an eternity. The fact that this statue was cut down, right? There's whether or not that was this person's intent, right? There's still that experience, that emotional experience of seeing a really important figure and role model to a lot of particularly young athletes, young baseball players, softball players, right? That this is what happens. Like there's no respect. There is just no respect. And then the action kind of fits into this larger narrative of trying to reduce or make small or cut down um, Black people, African American people in this country. That's kind of what it says to me, and just the
Yeah.
thoughtlessness with which this individual did it. And I don't know his racial identity. He certainly could be white based on his picture, but I don't know that. Um, and
Hmm.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe that doesn't matter, but I think that there is, to your point, that symbolism. It's big, and I think that got missed in a lot of the reporting.
Yeah. And, even to your point around, yes, this is vandalism, but even think about what vandalism truly is. It's somebody deliberately tearing up, tearing down, damaging someone else's property. And I dare anybody listening to this podcast to think about one moment in the history of Blackness where something Black wasn't vandalized, destroyed, taken away, um, completely cut down. I doubt you could say that. I'm trying to think of a moment or a time or a situation in which there wasn't someone vandalizing either property or a person. If we go all the way from literally vandalizing the freedom of Black folks to this point right now, there is nothing in Black history that says we have ever not been vandalized, right? And so, given that, yes, it's a big deal. And for a lot of people, they don't care about the intent, they care about the impact. And I'm just imagining, little boys going out to baseball practice and they're looking up to see the usually standing statue of this person that they're trying to emulate, and he's not even there. Like, it is thoughtless. It's thoughtless. It's and I think what's so sad is that once again, as folks that are part of this community, it always feels like that conundrum of being frustrated and upset, but never being surprised. Never. I would not be
Right.
surprised.
Right.
I will not continue to be surprised when such things continue to happen because they will. And so, given that, this kind of goes back to a little bit of our conversation around Dr. King's home and the next steps of now. How are they going to secure it, right? If they're thinking ahead, how are you going to secure a $200,000 statue that's publicly open? Those are things to think about now in a culture that's never not been vandalized, taken advantage of, those types of things. So it's something to be really concerned with, and it seems to be a norm towards blackness that they're going to have to somehow
Yeah.
at least
Yeah.
attempt to interrupt.
Yeah, and just to wrap up this phase, as you were talking, it also took me back to conversations you and I have had around critical media consumption, right? And when we're
Uh,
reading reports about things like this that are absent kind of what you and I have just been discussing and what you just shared, that as a critical consumer of the media, I think it's
mhm.
incumbent upon us to think about that, right? To think about, what is this story missing? What is the
Yes.
larger impact here that's missed, and into which narrative does this fit, right? um, I
Hmm.
think that is just an important reminder for us that the story is much deeper than just some dude sawing off Jackie Robinson's statue and then burning it in a trash can, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Exactly. Oversimplification can protect certain groups. We know this. So yeah, you're right.
Ooh, yeah. Boom. That's a great way to end that phase. Love it. Put that between quotation marks, Shaunna, and put that on social. It's a good one.
Ah,
All
absolutely.
right, so let's transition to phase two. So thinking about Little League baseball, and opportunities for young people to participate in after school programs that may or may not be sport related. This next phase is an oldie but a goodie. Some of you may have read in the Atlantic, or indeed in many other publications, because, like I said, this is an oldie but a goodie. The school day here, and it's the school day in the United States, but I actually think this is applicable probably in a lot of different countries, that the school day here ends a good 2 hours prior to the workday. And so in, you know, 1950s America, right? When, we're talking about kind of the nuclear family and how a lot of women didn't work, that school day ending at 3 p.m. or 2 p.m. in the afternoon was not a problem because mom could just roll on over and get the kids. But now we're finding, well, it's been a problem for a while, right? But 75% of women who have school age children are working, and but fewer than half of U.S. public schools provide any kind of after school program. So you end up with a situation where it's predominantly women again who are leaving their jobs or dropping their hours so they can accommodate that that changing that change, right? That difference. And so I'm curious for you, Shaunna, as a mom, right? Right now, you're an entrepreneur, obviously, so you have a little bit more flexibility with your time, but that's not always been the case. Like, what do you think schools should do? Because it just actually blows my mind the more that I think about this, that the reality of kind of both parents or family members or all family members, guardians working 8 to 5, that's not a 2024 thing, right? Like, that has been a reality for decades. So why has the school system continued to stay on whatever school, I don't even know what the schedule is actually. You'd be better positioned to answer that, but 7 to 2, 7:30 to 2:30, right? Like, why has it been so stubborn?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. So let me share with you pre-divorce nuclear family schedule and now single parenting but co-parenting and also still problematic. Let me share both schedules. So when I was still married, the boys they are 3 years apart, which means one of them was in daycare, the other one was in public school. Um, and yet that still was a challenge because for us here in the DMV area, especially at that time when you actually had to commute to work, even if your commute was short, it was still very tight to get to work. So, for example, if there was wraparound care where there's preschool and post school care, even with that, it may not open until 7 a.m., right? If you have to be at work at 8, you just have chalked it up that you're going to be late because you can be sitting at the door as they unlock the door and throw your kid out of the car at 7 o'clock, and it still may take you a full hour to get to work, right? So that was the drop off situation. The pickup situation is very similar. If, which is a huge if, mom and dad, mom or dad walks out the door of the office at 5:01 and tries to get to pick up by whenever they close, usually at 6:30, both daycare and public school, you're still pushing it. You're probably not going to get there on time. You might get there on time, but probably not. And if you're late, especially for daycare, it for our daycare at least, it was at least $1 per minute of lateness. Okay. So that was when I was still married and co-parenting, and
Ooh.
it was the better situation, right? When it came to
Okay.
the drop off
Okay.
pickup, right? So that was then. Now we're co-parenting well, but the schedule again is obliterated. Both of us are able to work from home, which I'm grateful for, which does afford us flexibility that many others do not have. And still, it's hard. So, my oldest son is in middle school, and my youngest son is in elementary. So, seventh grade, fourth grade, two different schools. My younger son, I'll give you my schedule for the day. My younger son needs to be in the school building by 8 a.m. Then, my older son gets on the bus about 8:45. By the time I get home, it's, if I'm lucky, 9:15. So even with working from home from 9 to 5, that doesn't work because I'm already starting my workday off late, right? Then pickup time. My younger son, elementary school, the bell rings at 2:30. Walking out the door at 2:30. So I need to be sitting in the pickup line at 2:30, or if he just walks to his dad's home, which is closer, 2:30. Still, someone probably should be home at 2:30. Last I checked, it's against the law to have a kid that's under 12 in the house by themselves. Last I checked, I may be wrong on that. But if that still holds, you got a kid walking in the house 2:30, 2:45 alone. Big brother, the bell does not ring for middle school until 3:55. So he can take the bus home, he'll be home by 4:15, etc. So you still have at least one kid, if not more than one kid, home alone before you can even walk out of the door of your office at 5 o'clock, whether you're at home or in an office. None of this works. Now, let me
Right.
add the before care and after care.
Mm-hmm.
Before care, like I said, can never open early enough for you to get to work on time.
Right.
Aftercare can't stay open long enough for you to get off work on time.
Mm-hmm.
And last time I checked, let's be very clear, before care and aftercare is not free.
Okay.
You have to pay for it. I can't remember exactly what we paid previously, but it was not free. So,
Mm-hmm.
given that, can you see how whether you're in a nuclear family, in a single parent home, in a co-parenting situation, none of it works. In fact, it's so timely that we're
Right.
even having this conversation because there was a mother that posted in the PTO Facebook page, "Hey, this year I'm lucky. I have both of my kids in the same school. Yay, they're on the same schedule. But next year I'm going to have one in middle and one in elementary, and there's an hour and 15-minute gap between schedules. How do y'all do this and still get to work on time?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Every single response says, set alarms, give your kids responsibility, and pray. That's all you can do. Excuse me?
Yeah.
Now,
That's
I'm praying
ridiculous.
for my kids regardless, but I'm just saying that's not a reasonable solution for people that have to get to work. So, to this point, I've been living this experience pre COVID and post COVID. So
Mm.
I have no easy answers for you. It's not easy. It's probably the toughest part of my experience, but here we are. Does not work. Doesn't work for anybody.
No, and it's just mind blowing. And then the cost you just identified of the kind of preschool and post school care. So then, okay, so financially, I'm thinking, there's two of us in this household. We're both earning, but the cost of this before and after care or other forms of childcare is prohibitive. So it really doesn't. So all of the money that one of us is working just goes straight into providing that after care and the before care, so why bother, right? I might as well just, not work. And so that we know that women in relationships always earn less or most
Yes.
often earn less. So then
Yes.
that's the person that gives up the job, right? And then with a single parent where there's no co-parent situation, I mean, that's got to be even. I mean, you can't not work, right? As a single parent, you have to have a job. Most jobs are 8 to 5 if you're going to go full time, unless you're maybe in healthcare or construction, and perhaps your hours are a little more, random. But it just seems like I don't understand why the school system hasn't caught up with that, or the other way around, the work system hasn't caught up with the school system, right? So if the school system isn't going to change its hours and it's going to finish at 2:30 in the afternoon, why haven't we rethought what it means to be a full-time employee to accommodate that, right? Like one of those systems has to give, right? Because this kind of mismatch that has now existed for a generation is causing unnecessary cost and stress. It's removing people from the labor force, people who are most absent from the labor force, right? And so that impacts earning capability, that impacts generational wealth. There's just a lot that's happening there. Um,
Yeah, and then one more thing to add to that conversation too that I don't want to neglect because you and I both from a school administrator perspective understands the challenges that they have. So let me throw this extra piece in. So in the walking distance for my boys, there's what 4 to 5 elementary schools, one middle school, and a brand new high school that's not even maybe 3 years old. 2 years, not including the COVID year. They were actually supposed to open up during the COVID year. So anyhow, imagine from a school administrator perspective, understanding that the staggered start times of elementary, middle, and high is almost a requirement. Why? Because there's a shortage in bus drivers to get the kids to school. So, how do you create a workaround? If I have 1/3 the amount of bus drivers I need, that 1/3 will have to take the route 3 times, one time for elementary, one time for middle, and one time for high school to maximize the small number of bus drivers. They can't get everybody to school at the same time due to the bus driver shortage either. So I do understand the headache that the school administrators and the county has, but then too I'm thinking to myself, okay, there has to be another route to that. Are you paying folks enough money that they want to drive a bus? Are you protecting them? Are you giving them benefits as bus drivers because it is a tough and hectic job? All those different things. Are you providing those? So again, systems thinking just blows this whole thing up. Yes, I would love a simplified process that kept up to speed as far as scheduling is concerned. But yet, if I were, on the county school board, I understand their dilemma as well. Both and going on at the same time.
oh, yeah. The school bus thing is interesting because we didn't have school buses in the UK. Like, so that I don't even know that they do now, right? Like, so this whole, so you, there's here there's a benefit, I would say, like that you can at least put your child on a bus at some point. Like in the UK, when at least when I was growing up, that wasn't a thing. Like every child had to make their own way to the school, whether that was walking, cycling, public transportation, or a family member um, driving them, right? Like there was no like for kids. And so if you took school buses out of this equation in the United States context, that would blow things up even more, right? Because that would make it 20 times, 50 times harder, probably.
Oh, absolutely. Because again, going back to not having the the nuclear family in place. Like so the boy's dad lives in walking distance of school. I definitely do not. I live 9 to 10 miles away from school. So there's literally no possible way if I did not have my own personal form of transportation, then the boys would not be able to get to that school in particular. They would have to go to a different school. And so, yeah, all of that blows everything up if you take away the bus system from all of it. And we see little snippets of that challenge. For example, again, remember I told you how we only have like 1/3 of the bus drivers we need. God forbid, Miss Lisa, the bus driver, is sick for one day, then there's nobody to replace Miss Lisa, the bus driver, which means those kids have to figure it out and those parents have to figure it out. So our phones are blowing up all day long with preschool and post school emails if there's a bus that's going to be late, if there's a bus that's going to be missing, all of that's going on every day, all day from school systems. And so, yeah, you're introducing yet another challenge with this whole process. So, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a mess. It's a true mess.
Yeah, and it's just, yeah, it's a product of, yeah, decades ago when family systems look different, right? And now those families look different, and the fact that in a family, however many adults exist in that family, most of them are working, right? And
That's right.
many of them are working 8 to 5, if not longer hours. And then yeah, so it's like inertia, right? It feels like there's inertia, and it's harming people who have the least financial capabilities, is what it feels like. Just constantly like adding another brick for them to carry, right?
Oh yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't know.
Like
Yeah.
like even what you mentioned too, and I know we've gone on a little bit longer with this phase, but even what you mentioned around the option of, okay, if there's buses are taken out of the equation, walk, bike, or, personal transportation. That's assuming that a family has the means for personal transportation. That's assuming that a family has the means to acquire a bike for one or more kid, even if you can acquire one, because both of my kids have more than one bike, and I still would not allow them to necessarily ride their bikes home. Why? Because we don't have that type of infrastructure here in the US. Like on and on and like all those things. I would be
Yeah.
worried out of
Yeah.
my mind every day thinking about, okay, looking at my watch, how long, when are they going to get
Yes.
here? So all of that plays in. So, going
Yep.
back to what we've said from day one on this podcast,
Mm.
the solution may sound simple, but it usually is not, because there's a whole system that holds this problem in place for family members. So I'm going to keep
Mm-hmm.
watching that post in the PTO page to see if anybody answers her with a real solution. But so far, there has been no real solution for that parent that's asking the same question you are here.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that's a big question that we don't have an answer for, but one that just kind of came back into my inbox recently that I to, wanted to touch on. So let's move to phase three. What do you have for us, Shaunna?
Yeah, yeah. Well, phase three reminds me of countless times when my mother told me that I probably need to fix my face. This is it. This is it. And so we have Fani Willis. Fani Willis is right now being questioned about her relationship.
Maybe.
All right, so we might have had a blip on the screen here because our internet was unstable, but I think we're back, Lisa, to get into Fani Willis, who we've both been following separately, but now we get a chance to talk about it together, which is always exciting. But Fani Willis. All right, y'all. Let's get real about Fani and what's going on here. Fani Willis, the DA that is the hot seat herself, right? Isn't it interesting to watch
Yep.
attorneys
Yep.
try other attorneys? Like it's almost like you don't have that same power dynamic anymore when you actually have someone on the stand who's not an attorney and doesn't think like an attorney. And so when you have an attorney asking questions and then the attorney responding and you can tell she's like three, four steps down the road in the strategy of, I know why you're asking this question. And let me tell you what I'm not going to share with you because this is not true, etc. So seeing uh, two attorneys literally putting their training out there to battle is one thing. But we can't say that this particular situation uh, is without racial undertone or gendered undertone as well, because Fani Willis is oftentimes providing very direct communication. And Lisa, I have to tell you, when I see the headlines trying to describe that direct conversation, usually it is very combative descriptives. It's usually very warlike descriptions. And for me, I'm thinking to myself, as a Black woman listening to another Black woman, I'm thinking, it's not too bad. Like, she's being kind the way she's delivering that message right now, if you didn't know. However, if you put her up against or in comparison to a Brett Kavanaugh, for example, okay, we've got a woman who's angry and pissed off at the world, and then you've got a man that's passionate. Come on now, Lisa. We know that ain't the
Mm-hmm.
truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Yeah.
with that, the reason why I'm bringing this up is not to necessarily get into the politics of the case, because Lisa and I can get into that. We all know that this is very much a distraction to the real issue at hand. So, let's name that. But for this purpose, for this conversation, we do want to get into the interpretation of those that are usually underrepresented and disenfranchised, and the way in which they are tone policed when they are standing up for themselves. So this woman literally could be whispering her point of view, and it would be seen as combative and hostile and angry and all of these words that people usually don't present when it comes to men or anyone who's white or anyone who's in a dominant group. So I'll just stop there and say my interpretation of a Black
Yeah.
woman as a Black woman, I am not like, I'm almost looking at the captions of her videos and photos like clickbait. Like, this doesn't add up to me. Like,
Right.
the text is saying it's purple and I'm looking at the picture and it's saying orange. Like, no, it's not compatible to me. But I also know that's based on my own biased lenses. But what do you think, Lisa? How do you think it's being covered? And if it's
Mhm.
even close to fair?
Yeah. I think and critical media consumption, right? I think I know, took it head on and stood up for herself. And I wouldn't necessarily categorize her testimony as combative. I mean, I thought it was great that she took the time to remind people of who was actually on trial versus, the distraction that is the situation that she finds herself in. Um, I think it's a little bit of a lose-lose situation for her though, right? Like if she had been on the stand but performed right, she hadn't have set such strong boundaries and spoken so directly about the truth of the situation, then people would have critiqued her for not standing up for herself, being wishy-washy, and then is she strong enough to be the DA in this case, and blah 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 blah, right? And then if she had chosen not to take the stand at all, then you have a situation where there is a narrative that is out there that is inaccurate. And, she would have been critiqued for that choice as well, right? Like, so I don't know. There was no good option for her. And so she likely chose the path that she felt was going to be most productive and useful. And, unsurprisingly, she has, been called combative and aggressive. And when really she's just standing her ground, right? She's really just saying, this is not relevant. There's no legal grounds for the particular pursuit. And the truth is the truth, and you're trying to make something out of nothing. I do think it's interesting because as Shaunna and I were having this conversation prior to getting on here to record, and I was like, that Wade guy, right? And Shaunna pointed out that people don't even know like his name, right? And this is a situation. It takes two. There were two people in this romantic relationship, right? And so, if we are critiquing Fani Willis's choice around entering an office relationship, given the enormity of this case, then why aren't we doing the same for him, Nathan Wade? Right? Why aren't we saying, well, perhaps as a special prosecutor in this situation, you perhaps should not have engaged in a romantic relationship with the district attorney, right? Like, I don't hear that. And I even, well, like, Shauna's point enabled me to catch myself kind of doing the same thing, right? Because I was just like, wait, I remember his first name, but I know who he is, right? So I think that's an important piece here to talk about too. And he's not been critiqued as being combative, right? He's not been critiqued as being aggressive or irresponsible, to my knowledge. I mean, I haven't seen that.
Right, right. No, I haven't seen it either, Lisa. So, that's what gets me about this whole thing is that, even and I'm with you, Lisa. I'm not without blame either. I was like, now what's his name again? the fact that we couldn't call his name as readily as we could call Fanny's name was very telling because we are pretty well versed and keep up with a lot of news. And so imagine people who aren't well versed and don't keep up with a lot of news. I know they don't know that man's name. And so, given that, I think there's a lot of race and gender dynamics going on there. And, at this point, you're right. Uh, there is no right answer for Fannie Willis and what she's willing to do or not do. And I think, again, it gets interesting when it's like there is no tone of a woman of color that ever seems to be acceptable. Even silence is like a problem, right? And so, given that, it's like, what do you do? You're exactly right. There was no win for her at all. There was no, and like I said, previously, it wasn't even a win factored in. It was which loss would be worse, right? So the loss of not getting on the stand and being completely silenced and letting people have this whole narrative that's not true,
Right,
or
right.
losing by telling your truth and losing, you know, in flames, but still being able to have the open mic to tell your truth. I think she went with the open mic to tell her truth and neither one was going to
Mm-hmm.
be a
Yeah.
win, but it was a better and more palatable loss for her. That she could walk away saying, "I said my piece," and it's on record.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it was I mean I kind of love her for getting on the stand, right? And and because I know that there had been previous communications where she and her team had called the other the defense, they called them on their sexism, um, in the ways in which they had been rude and non-responsive
Yes.
to them. And so I just see that same thread playing out. So I appreciated that she decided to put her foot down here. But um it just makes me sad because I think if she were a white guy, then this probably wouldn't even have gotten to this point, right? There likely wouldn't even have been some kind of trial to, not trial, it was a hearing really to determine whether or not there was a conflict of interest and whether or not that person should stay on the case. So I just think the whole thing from beginning to end stinks, of sexism and racism, that
Mhm.
unique position that women of color sit in, and she's a woman of color in a powerful and visible position, so she she's in the crosshairs, right? Like,
Mhm.
literally and metaphorically, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And that piece around, you know, for those that aren't familiar with that terminology of tone policing, this is what's really happening in the headlines of dismissing the validity of Fannie Willis's points because they may be perceived as delivered in an emotion that's unacceptable. And again, I'm going back to my point of let me reframe. I dare you to share with me any tone by a woman of color that is acceptable. There is none that folks can say that, oh, well, they're too loud. Well, they're too soft spoken. Oh, well, they're too silent. They're not smiling enough. They're frowning too much. Like, there's never a delivery that is acceptable from women of color broadly. I would say white women too, thrown in there, but to a 10x percent for women of color and Black women. And so when you can't win, that's where I'm up the camp, Lisa, where I understand tone policing, and at the very same time, even with tone in place, does it negate the validity of the statement? Whether you're screaming it or whether you're whispering it, or whether Shaunna writes it on a post-it note. The truth for her is still the truth, no matter which emotion you wrap around it. And so that's why I really kind of try to take all the air out of tone policing, because it is used way too often as a distraction from the truth or someone's lived experience. So I
Yeah.
just don't want to
Yeah.
buy into it. And I feel like the tone policing is coming through the a lot of the descriptions of Fanny, as well as, some of the clickbait that's out there. Oh, she fires off at da 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 da. That woman talked like she was talking to her grandmother, kindly and direct.
Right.
And it was still a problem for people. Why? Because she said it through a Black body, a Black woman's body. That's why it's problematic for people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it sucks. It
Mm-hmm.
sucks.
Mm-hmm.
There's no win. You're exactly right. No win.
Yeah, it does suck. And I think just another to underscore, you know, paying attention to the ways in which she is being reported on, right? Her testimony is being reported on, like critically consuming that, questioning the words that are used, thinking about how a position is being framed, right? From what vantage point, and is that same language used for a guy, right? I do think
Mhm.
that that's an important takeaway here that we want people to think about. Just always, always think about what are you reading? What are you viewing? How are people framing the message? And what bias does that portray?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And even how your own built-in biases in interpret what you're hearing, right? So because I
Yes.
I,
Yes.
I wrote about something a while ago where when I was in seminary, we had to go and observe different houses of worship and so forth. And so of course we went to a traditional Black church at that time, and all the interpretations were completely different from mine because I was the only Black person in the group.
Mm.
The white folks in the group said, "Oh, well, we heard the preacher screaming at the congregation." I interpret it as this is the height of the sermon that is actually called whooping, which is known in African tradition to make sure that people hear the thesis of your sermon in times where you didn't have mics and you were having tent services outside. We all heard the same thing differently
Yeah.
because of your lived
Yeah.
experience, right? And we do it all the time. And I think to your point around being very conscious um partakers in media, I think we need to even question, okay, thought that sounded a little bit crass. Well, whether that's true or not, think about why you thought that was crass. How might you have been groomed to think about things in a certain way? And once we start questioning ourselves and the media, I think we'll get closer to what the lived experience is. If not, we're just going to keep falling for the clickbait.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's enough for this week. We'll wrap up our episode here after Dr. Gold drops some more pearls there. So, where can folks get in touch with us, Shaunna, for in the interim before our next episode?
Yeah, well, Lisa, I know you and I both have been dropping pearls. It just happens to be that we're fired up in the middle of Black History Month, right? So I guess they need to get ready for us to be fired up for Women's History Month next month, because we're still going to go there with that too. So, but y'all, as you're trying to keep up with us in between episodes, please make sure that you go and subscribe at our YouTube channel, Unfazed Unedited. Please go there. We are also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. How about that, y'all? We're on Spotify. Please follow us there. Leave a review if possible. If it's something that really struck your fancy, please tell us about it. We're on Instagram, of course, LinkedIn. Email us info@unfazedpodcast.com with your questions, comments. As you know, Lisa and I usually bring up articles or things that are have popped up on social media that are great topics, you can send us some of that stuff if you see something or hear something. And then, of course, take a look at our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can see the archive of old shows and all the new shows. But if you like this week's episode, please like us, subscribe, leave a review, share this with folks. We hear that folks actually use these particular videos and audio as staff meetings, which is free, which is great. So please use this to share with others in this phase of your life. So until next time, we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.